attention to general health and safety training and consultancy at ARCO, but still specialises in confined spaces. He's left some brochures around tonight from confined spaces. They're on the table there. Probably not enough for everybody, but there is quite a few there, so you can pick one of these on your way out. So Ken, he's been involved himself in designing and developing a whole range of mobile and static confined space training facilities, really just to try and keep it interactive and relevant. And he's also a chartered member of CMIOSH. So before I just sort of hand over to Ken, the normal sort of etiquette, if you've got questions, we'll take questions, but we will have a Q&A at the end. If you have got a question, if you could please just put your hand up so we can see you, and we'll try and get a microphone round so that everybody else can hear what's going on. So enjoy this evening, and thank you, Ken.
Where are the slides on now?
Was Alex, can you change that over?
Which one is what's on that? That was the one? Yeah, okay. F5 it. Okay. Right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you this evening about confined spaces. So nice to see an CMIOSH branch meeting in the evening. Mine's during the day where I come from, and very, very difficult to get to, so and it's great to see such a turnout as well, so thank you very much, and thank you for coming. Confined space training, who needs it? Well, that's going to be inextricably linked to confined spaces. Where are they? And looking at sort of challenging, maybe exploring a little bit confined spaces, maybe, as Nigel said, maybe not where we think they are. I'll give you some examples as we go through. As Nigel said, any questions at the end, either shout them out, talk in the forum, or we'll stay back a bit if you wish. So confined spaces in lots of places in our working life. As Nigel said, my background has been oil and gas and offshore and that kind of thing, and you inevitably think you're going to get confined spaces. You go to work knowing that you're going to deal with confined spaces. So there's some you expect, and those are typical ones. That's quite an arty photograph, the left-hand one. That was literally holding the camera up as I walked to work one morning and doing that, and it came like sort of a lovely sunrise over the east coast, looking out over a gas plant. The obvious, the tank and the drain leading down there. So the obvious confined spaces. So we expect those, and I think everybody that's dealing with safety in general would know to look at them and to consider that they're there, and if they haven't got the skills, to find somebody who has when they're dealing with them. Looking at some we might not, and just expanding on these three photographs that I've added in there. The building on the left is a university building. And a guy I knew, a real good guy in health and safety, rang me one day, said, Ken, I've got a project at the university. I'm dealing with confined spaces. Can you come and have a look with me? And kind of, if you've been doing the offshore and the oil and gas, you're thinking, well, you know, we do confined spaces every day. What's a university going to have in the way of confined spaces? And he said, I've got some issues that I'm concerned about. Will you come and chat about them? So I said, what's concerning you, Richard? What are we looking at? So we go down a typical corridor, what to all intents and purposes is in a building like this, and there's a little aluminium strip in the floor with about a dozen screws in. So we take those up and it reveals the photograph in the centre, which it turns out this building is in a high water table. In there we've got a submersible pump plugged into 13 amp mains, you can see. The pump fails occasionally, and the maintenance team managed to slot themselves through that hole under the floorboards to go and repair it. Confined space, do you reckon? Yeah, I think so. I think we've got, with the water and the detritus and the fact that it's settled, that we get deposits settling in there, then absolutely confined space. So this evolved, and they said, well, can you do a confined space register to find over the whole campus over 400 confined spaces? Void spaces in the roof, gaps down underneath plant rooms where there was natural gas and CO2 going through, where they'd had leaks in pipes in the past. Because the confined spaces, when you look at it, confined spaces regulations talk about reasonably foreseeable specified risks. I think they mean hazards really, but for some reason the HSC on that particular occasion said specified risks. And so we kind of look at it and, well, you know, when you ask yourself, is it reasonably foreseeable? Well, if you've got a CO2 pipe that we know has leaked about 6 times in the last 6 months, then it's reasonably foreseeable. You know, we've cracked it really. And then this particular university, being back up near home, it suffered floods in 2007. There was a complete failure of the water pumping system that would have taken all the water out into the river and out to sea, and the best part of a city flooded. So this tunnel underneath, and all these buildings like the one on the left are riddled with these tunnels. In fact, a lot of the maintenance staff and some of the students, if they can, use it as a method of getting about the campus. If it's raining, everybody goes down there, everybody knows where to get down and come out in another bit. So, you know, a few confined space entries there. For about probably 50, 60 years, they've always been dry, but then suddenly they're flooded. So they've now been connected to sewers. There's now years of detritus and things like that was dry. There's rags, there's that kind of thing, there's wood, there's stuff, there's you know, natural growth down there, all now post-flood decomposing, yeah? So if you go down there with your hydrogen sulfide meter or you measure the methane levels, you get a real good read now. So this is another thing to think about with confined spaces. What wasn't a confined space, but is now a confined space, yeah? Till it was cleaned out, the whole thing was gutted, it was cleaned out, it was made right again, it was ventilated properly, and we went back to how we were before. But at that time, it had to be treated. There was a reasonably foreseeable risk of somebody being overcome by the gases in that area. What was somewhere people would almost go and play down was now somewhere where you could die. So we've got that situation. Excuse me a second. So that kind of was my first real exposure to thinking. As I say, you get a bit macho if you're doing all this offshore stuff. You know, you're talking, you know, distillation columns and oil rig legs, and you know, I never thought about this, and it suddenly brought a big thing home to me. Well, you know, you think you know a lot about it, Ken, but actually you don't know as much as you think you know. You know, you need to go and look at other stuff, consider other things. So this was asking a question. A building on the left in London, a gas installation, one of the newest gas installations on the East Coast, which has the most confined spaces. The answer is definitely the gas installation, but not by many. Yeah, it's surprising when you look, it's not by many. I've actually had the privilege, or whichever way you want to look at that kind of job, of measuring all of them, and there are quite a lot in both buildings. Taking the building one that we've just looked at, and just for the avoidance of anybody thinking, yes, he's talking about big buildings, but I bet he doesn't really mean it. I bet there aren't any really. If you only need to right-click Google, and it's not where I find it. You know, you can find stuff out if you want to right-click Google, but Pemex is the. So this is in the public domain, so I'm not telling any tales because you can't really do something like that without it being in the public domain. But that's the National Oil Company of Mexico, yeah, where they built that building, like many of the buildings down the East End developments in London, where they're built on a brownfield site. So brownfield sites are built near docklands, there's inevitable contaminated land and the like. And this had an annex to the building, which you can see at the front of the left-hand photograph, that annex to the building. Underneath there, they had a power failure and sent 2 electricians down to do a little bit of functional testing, I think the electrical types call it, yeah. That involved a torch and poking some test gear into somewhere where they might find a connection, which they duly found, but only to find that the place was full of methane, which killed over 60 people and injured over 200. Confined space in a tower block in a city. Yeah, so that's just making the point. And it just makes the point we similarly need to manage those things just the same way. You know, we need to think about, well, what have we got underneath the building? I added these in literally last night because this was some confined space training I did some years ago, but this is underneath the building in London, where we did some confined space training, but that, on the left-hand one, you can see where the pipes go down and the ladders go down. It's going down to pumps and pits, and it goes down, and it goes down, and it goes down. Yeah? And it's a place where, for me personally, you're on this borderline thing. Do I call it a confined space or not? It's the kind of place where when I went down the first time to look at it, was I gas monitoring, doing personal gas monitor? Did I have an escape set on? Absolutely, because I simply wasn't sure. Where am I headed? Yeah, and we could pick increased methane levels. The main thing we can pick up down there is reduced oxygen levels. Yeah, don't forget oxygen has only got to drop 1.4% to go from what is normal to what sets off the alarm on an oxygen monitor. Only 1.4%. It's got to drop. Yeah, so not very much at all. Yeah. So that's just making the point. That's in London. Yeah. So I brought the Mexico thing back here now and showing you exactly the same situation in the centre of London. I've worked down that one. So confined space underneath a tower block in London. So confined space types. We inevitably then think of the industry. Industry tends, if you look at the City and Guilds, for example, accreditation for confined spaces, it's very, very simple. It's either water, or the other people that aren't water get the prefix non-water. So it's kind of water or everybody else. You get non. And the suffix changes from 02 to 52 for a training course. It's non-water. So my world would be the right-hand side bit here, non-water. The left-hand bit is the water industry. But looking at what I'm thinking about, what I'm talking about here, can we see that starting to develop here are other confined space possibilities that we may need to manage? That's the kind of what I'm trying to get over. Looking at the confined space types, by the way, is leading to the training. Who's going to need training? Because these are industries where people didn't think they would need the training, but as you can see from the previous slide, did. So I've got a new section. I'm spending an awful lot of time, more time in the south in and around London at the moment than I am back at home. And the reason for that is that I reckon there's another kind of confined space called infrastructure, where the design of the premises creates the confined space. For example, I'm spending an awful lot of time at a major airport. There are two major airports in London. It's not the one to the west of London. Because it's riddled with confined spaces. Yeah? Both the major airports in London are riddled with confined spaces. What I'd not realised when I'd flown out of any airport is when you go past in the night all those blue lamps down the runway, I didn't realise that they changed the lamps from underneath, not from the top. So we've got a tunnel to crawl down underneath. Yeah? And if that tunnel gets a flood down it, we get the same situation as there was at the university. If there's a build-up of detritus, we get the opportunity for methane and hydrogen sulfide again. So back to it being a confined space. Looking at baggage handling systems, when you send your suitcase, hopefully expecting to see your clothing again when you get to the far end, but it sets off down that system, but it inevitably drops down under the ground and goes down some very, very, very tight tunnels, yeah? Not the usual confined space. And in fact, the only thing that will ever tip one of those over into being a confined space, or the usual thing, is one of the specified risks, which is an uncontrollable temperature that could cause unconsciousness. I was down one of those last summer. In fact, I've been down both the ones in the London airports. 35 degrees and going up all the time. From the ambient temperature, the friction from the elevators, the electrical power going through the motors, the heat from the gearboxes, 35 degrees and beyond. It's borderline to tipping this into a confined space. It's just stuff to think about in that regard, yeah. Just this infrastructure. So there's a stately home, yeah. That's a training course I ran late last year, actually, a stately home, not too far from where I live. Why has that got confined spaces? Because all the lords of the manor in my area, that's where the lords of the manor in my plot live. But everyone over the hundreds of years have decided to come home from some war somewhere and design it differently. And it's packed with void spaces. You know, you go on a floor and a floor drops about 4 or 5 feet for no reason. You think, well, that floor was up there, that one, so what's in there then? And it's packed with void spaces that have been home to rats and pigeons and God knows what for how many years you would not believe. Yeah, so we've got the biological hazard to go with hazards, you know, and dust that might affect you in there. So we did some confined space training. So what is a confined space? So it's in simple terms, it's not the place to do a confined space training course, by the way, but I've just looked at a couple of bits that you would normally talk about. Somewhere that's substantially, though not always entirely enclosed, so somewhere open-topped can be a confined space. All you need is heavier than air gas. We've got ourselves a confined space. And it's that reasonably foreseeable risk from substances in the space or nearby. So that's another thing to think about if you're looking at confined spaces, not that the situation or the infrastructure that you've got, but what's over there or over there or over there. I was asked to look at a pit the other week. Ken, can you come and look at this pit? We're thinking of working in this pit under an oven. Is it a confined space? So I kind of trekked down there, have a look at it. To be fair, it was borderline again, until I asked the question, what's in the big vessel just the other side of that screen over there, guys? Well, he said, that's the argon for the automatic welding plant. And has it ever leaked? Oh, every other day, mate. I said, right, okay. So that'll be just all we need then. If you open the doors at the far end of the factory to take that leak all the way down this pit, and it's goodbye and thank you to the maintenance people working. Yeah, we never thought about that. Good job you come. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it is. And so we're kind of like rigging stuff up to try and measure levels of argon travelling across the floor and situating. You know, we always talk about we have to have one standby person on a confined space. I had 4 on this, like it's an army. Yeah, between there and here to make sure if that gas starts to leak, we know about it and everybody's out of there. So it's just looking at the nearby bit as well. And it's usually a combination of those two that leads to an increased risk to people in confined spaces. It's getting that combination. It's the nearby one that we often don't get. You know, we're working down a pit and the truck stops nearby and the diesel smoke takes away the oxygen, stuff like that. You know, it's that simple stuff, yeah. So an example, a confined space hazard example, a restricted way. See, I've put way in and way out. I've resisted the temptation to say access and egress. All safety people say access and egress, don't they? It's always access and egress. A restricted way in and a restricted way out. So it's a hazard in itself. So if we look at this, that's the standard 575mm diameter as recommended in the approved code of practice for the regulations. 575mm diameter on new build. However, most confined spaces I seem to go in were built before 1997, and we've not seen the 575. And the older I get and the bigger I get, it's getting more of a struggle. But making the point with the photograph that if we send a rescue team in there wearing breathing apparatus, 575, by the way, is the size for somebody to get in wearing breathing apparatus. We know how big the breathing apparatus is, but we've not necessarily specified the whole diameter of the whole operation. He did go in later on. I think somebody just pushed him in, but it's getting tight. I'm working quite close with the fire and rescue services at the moment, and we had this very discussion Saturday before last. I was in Essex, and so it's always thinking about, can we actually get in? Have we got the right equipment? And this, have you got the right equipment? Looking at rescue is something I want to consider and just talk about later on. And it's the same inside the confined space. When you get inside, these are the guys, some guys practicing rescuing the dummy. Yeah. So this is the man in green is the rescue dummy. 50 kilos, yeah? Because I've got to have a 2-man lift and I don't want to break health and safety rules. If I do a full live rescue course, I'll let them try rescuing me. That's different. 95 kilos. Now that's a wholesome lot different. Trying to get somebody out of there, very, very difficult. Believe that's the dummy. But the point is, they're in the confined space and it's difficult. It's tight inside confined spaces. There's one I made bigger. That's supposed to be light-hearted, by the way, is that bit, yeah? The tank is no use, but I was decommissioning it anyway. So that's just, just to kind of see that, it's just the point. There is a point to that. The point is, don't work inside a confined space if you don't have to. Yeah. In fact, you're challenged by the regulations. If you can do it from the outside, do it from the outside. If it's not reasonably practicable, it was cut a big hole in it. That stopped it. Yeah. It's very, very simple. A fiver to the digger driver. Then just thinking about the tanker there, because that's back to my old life, you see. When you've sucked all that stuff out there and put it in the back of the tanker, you've gone off with another confined space, this time on wheels, but somebody's still got to clean that out as well. And so it goes on. Yeah. So we've got other confined space. So the first thing we've got to do is assess, have we got a confined space? So we're going to look at those specified risks. Can it be done without entering the confined space? We actually asked that, and I can tell you from experience, for 2 reasons. One was a negative experience. I once had a guy complain that his breathing apparatus had failed in a confined space, which you will all know is RIDO reportable. It hadn't, but that was by the by. I did get the attentions of the health and safety executive, and the first question I got asked was, prove to me that you thought about not going in the confined space. And all this, well, we've done it this way for 20 years, Gaffer did not hang in there with him. Yeah, it's proof to me you thought about not going in. In a more recent life, I do help the health and safety executive on occasions with confined space investigations, and I can tell you that question is still asked to this day. If you were to take any advice from this evening and you deal with confined spaces, it would be, on your risk assessment, write down on the first line, I have considered not going in the confined space. However, on this occasion, it's not reasonably practicable to do it otherwise, because that is the first question that you will be asked after, is the kettle on? So if a confined space situation then does exist, and remote operation isn't possible, you can't do it by remote operation, then a safe system of work has to be then developed, and it's a big job to develop it. For me, I always used to try and look for the way of not going in, because for me, as the boss as I was then, that doesn't need training and a lot of managing and looking after. Yeah, I can operate that thing dressed like this. But that does. Yeah, if you've got somebody in a confined space with hazardous chemicals, in a confined space and you're cleaning it out, you have something to manage. Yeah, if you want to get your teeth into some health and safety legislation and some permits to work and some risk assessment, then manage that, because it really takes some doing. Yeah, it really takes a bit of doing. I remember the regulations came out in 1997, as the person who used to clean things out, because that's, kind of, Nigel kind of did this wonderful introduction, but I'm a tank cleaner really, that's about the size of it, but that was what the job was, getting hazardous stuff out of tanks. If you're managing somebody doing that, it's at the sharp, you're at the sharp end. And I was really excited when the confined space regulations came out, because I thought, it'll tell me how to do this job safely. And I flicked through it, I read we just talked about a consultation document. I flicked through the consultation document. It says, don't go in the confined space till it's been thoroughly cleaned. And I thought there must be more to this. There must be a suffix or an appendix or something that tells you how to do it, that you can go in before it. But it says, don't go in till you've cleaned it. So, of course, clients would ring and say, can you clean the confined space out, mate? It says, we can go into it safely, because it says you can't go in the regulations. It's a bit of like it's a bit of a circle, this, you say. Now, it's been the same ever since. Anyway, they say that takes a lot of managing, does that. It's not the place for me to do health and safety legislation, but just think about all the stuff you're going to talk about, health and safety, work management, risk assessments, the regs, personal protective equipment, especially you're going to go inside there. Is it flammable? Will you need to earth out? Are you going to get static electricity? What will they be carrying? That's one of the problems with these baggage tunnels. It's about this high for 10 hours a day. Not a lot of fun. It's like working under this table for 10 hours a day. Yeah? Work equipment, is it special? Is it rescue equipment? Is it breathing apparatus? Hazardous substances, that's why people like me used to go into confined spaces. People rarely go into confined spaces because it's clean. Yeah, they usually go in there to deal with something because it's nasty. Work at height, if it's a tank with a lid on the top, the very second you lift the lid, you've invoked the work at height regulations as well as the confined space regulation. Let's have double bubble today for something to worry about, and a reasonably practicable way of doing it another way, yeah? So there's a whole lot, legislation-wise, and a lot more than that. So who does need training then? There's the obvious, yeah? The guy climbing in the confined space, the guy climbing in the boiler. He hadn't been trained. I was doing a safety inspection for somebody. This guy down the left hand at the bottom. I was walking past a boiler with the burner stood on the floor, and I heard a noise in the confined space. And I look in the confined space to find this individual in there just about to start work with a jackhammer, taking the refractory lining off the burner nozzle. And I went to see the site safety manager and said, have you issued a permit for that? He said, no, because it's not a confined space now we've taken the burner off. But it looks like one to me, wouldn't you say? Yeah, it looks like confined space. You'll see the British Standard EN registered CE marked polypropylene piece of lashing down there as a safety line. It had a safety line and a harness on, except he had nobody with him. Yeah, so he was working on his own. So who the hell's going to pull that? I have no idea. Yeah. So we had to have stopped the thing and have a meaningful discussion. And I think you know what that means. Yeah, then you see, you get trapped again. This is a different university, but this is a sewage pump. For those of you live in a delicate world where you've not seen a sewage pump, that's what one looks like. It's at the bottom of there. And you maintain the sewage pump by lifting it up on the block and tackle, yeah, to the top and maintain it, which is all very well if you maintain the block and tackle. But if the block and tackle seizes up, what did the architect put on there to attract the maintenance guy to do? But climb down those rings and let's address the problem with the sewage pump, yeah? Which is exactly what was going on when I found it. Like, who goes down there? Oh, everybody, mate. Yeah, we just go down and we fiddle with it. So like, okay, that's be fine, yeah. Great, yeah. And then there's just the obvious, anybody and everybody and anybody, tanks and on the rail and grain silos, that's where those are taken from. There's the obvious people who need confined space training. There's the not so obvious. This guy is doing welding. So if you imagine somebody fabricating a round tank, they do that horizontally, and it starts the day as a piece of flat sheet metal. And then they roll it together, and he welds the top seam. Then somebody lifts an end plate on, and he sits inside and welds the end in. And then somebody lifts the other end on, the one with the hole in, so he starts the day with a flat sheet of steel and ends up the day working in a confined space, and it's managing where that changeover point is. You know, when did it cease to be a piece of steel and when is it now a confined space? Because welding drives away oxygen. Yeah, real easy to get that with no oxygen in. What I've got there, that's another job we do a lot, aircraft fuel tanks. There's not many of them I can actually get inside like that, by the way, I have to be honest with you, but they're just prolific in aircraft. You know, when you sit looking over the wings, if you're unlucky enough to get the seat over the wings when you go on holiday and you can't see anything, inside there's the fuel. It's a fuel tank. If you get most Boeings, the entrance is under the wing, just near where you sit. There's a little hatch comes off that's about this big, and you go inside, and all the fuel level transponders and all the data that it sends out are inside there, and somebody goes in to maintain them and repair them. The ones I've been doing, that's where this came from, are to do with helicopters, all helicopter fuel tanks, underneath the floor, yeah? And for some reason, they build the transponders into them after they've fabricated the tank. I would have thought there might be a way to do it differently, but it's aircraft fuel tanks. I'm just giving you some wild examples. Anything to do with the emergency services. By default, the fire and rescue services are not trained in confined spaces. It's just how it is. They're trained in fighting fires. Some are specifically trained in rescue, but not necessarily all in confined spaces. The police, if they're doing, I've been working with the police lately, if they're doing work searching in cellars, searching in lofts, which are void spaces, looking for a cannabis farm in a loft or something like that, but we've got the full-on confined space. And the poor old paramedic guys, the ambulance guys, who sadly these guys have been, that there have been fatalities in that service if they've arrived before the fire and rescue service. Yeah, they say, it kind of gets serious for them. The ship's hold. Yeah, so what was the ship carrying last? Did it take off the coating of the hold? Because you would know that if you've got anywhere that's rusty, inside anywhere that's rusty there isn't any oxygen, because iron oxide is made from the oxygen in the atmosphere. And the last two multiple fatalities in the United Kingdom were both where we had people going what they call the chain lock on a ship, which is where the anchor chain is hauled into. And we had the typical confined space situation. If you look at it statistically, we usually get two would-be rescuers to one original casualty, because two people go in to try and rescue the one person that was already in. Both those cases, both those fatalities in the UK, one on the Humber near where I live and one in Scotland, that's exactly what happened. 3 people died in both cases through going in a compartment on a ship that was rusty. Yeah, so it's simple to do. Construction guys, putting the sleeve under there, we're in there, we could be contaminated land, with construction. Do we call all excavations confined spaces? Is an excavation a confined space? Certainly gives it a mention in the regulations that it's a confined space. Do all excavations get treated as confined spaces? Do we have a chance of one of the specified risks? Is there chalk in the ground? Because if there's chalk in the ground and it gets wet, you'll know that it gives off carbon dioxide. Immediately there's your confined space. If there's any chalk in the excavation. And seeing it's kind of a construction thing to backfill some excavations with chalk, that's exactly where you'll get it as soon as it rains. And then just to lighten it up again a little bit, there was this guy, but I guess he's got, His own confined, he's got his own problems, that confined space guy, yeah. Anyway, moving on. So finally down to the training. So we've looked at all the people. The reason I'm talking about these situations is anybody involved in that situation in some form will need some form of training, yeah. One thing you won't find in the confined spaces regulations in the Approved Code of Practice in L101 is the exception for who doesn't need training. It doesn't say except the boss, the guy in the white overalls, the inspector, the insurance inspector, the HSE guy, the guy from the fire service. It's everybody. It just does not make any exceptions. If you go in the confined space, you need training to go in the confined space. So anybody is, and what I've done is I've dragged little bits here, and as Nigel said, if you want this on PDF, and obviously, absolutely, you can have it on PDF, put it on PDF for you. I've just taken some little excerpts verbatim out of the regulations, out of the Approved Code of Practice. Now, I'm not going to read them all out to you, but we're talking about the need to avoid entry, which is a management thing, first of all. So you need to teach about managers and supervisors. Think about not going in, first of all. And what hazards there are likely to be in there. So let's get the management, yeah. Safe systems of work, permits to work, how emergencies arise, yeah, how we respond to them, and the dangers of not doing so. There's some guy, customer's own premises there, with his own confined space arrangement. They have the premises, I do the training for them. There's something significant on that particular photograph which will come back out later on. Those guys rescuing or trying to rescue a colleague, yeah? So anybody in confined space training, if you're going to go in confined spaces, it involves a practical element. You've got to do the practical bit of it, yeah? Should involve demonstrations and practical exercises, all bits from L101. So this is the bit where I did right-click little bits and put it in. Real easy, yeah? Real easy to put these. Atmospheric testing equipment. Can the person use the gas monitor? Will they understand how to use it? The use of breathing apparatus, escape sets. Yeah? Are we geared up to do that stuff? Practice through to competence. I think you'll see that on a slide. It says practice through to competence before the first time you go in. So people will ring me on a Monday and say, can we do some confined space training? Yeah, not a problem. What do you want? I said, I've 6 guys to go in a tank on Wednesday. Could you fit them in tomorrow, please? Well, first of all, the answer would be no on all fronts. But the point is, you cannot train somebody to go in a confined space in a day. Because when you shout something's gone wrong, you need it to be like that, and they come out safely. Yeah, you don't practice that in a couple of minutes. It's got to be practiced through to competence, it tells us, yeah? Just getting the guys in the classroom, getting them happy. Even with the fire and rescue guys, will find some interest from that, yeah? Looking at rescue techniques and self-rescue exercises, rehearsals, might involve a full weight dummy. Yeah, so it's got to be realistic and not just drill based. So people who need this are the people who are going into confined spaces. Yeah, people are going to get this realistic. There's one of the dummies, not arguing much, but he's being rescued yet again. He knows it better than they do now. He's getting quite good at it. Managers and supervisors. I have a thing about managers and supervisors. Sadly, not coming on confined space training courses. Yeah. Over the past, since the mid-1990s, I've probably trained hundreds, I don't know, maybe thousands of people to do confined spaces. I've lost count. All the managers I could probably get on a London bus. Sadly. Yeah. So the people often doing the risk assessment, writing out the permit and developing the safe system of work for the person to go in the confined space has never done any confined space training. I don't quite know how that would hang together if we had that to explain to anybody. When we're trying to explain our accountability, it just may be difficult, Mike, that one for me anyway. It's, and if you've got even if you've got a contractor in like I used to be, and you've got confined spaces in your area, surely you'd want to know what's going on. Particularly if you're going to issue the permit to work to the contractor to say this confined space is okay to go into. But that's maybe me, but I just think it is. Supervisors, yeah? An awareness of confined spaces quite in depth, talking about the hazards, the precautions, understanding the need to go in and safe systems work. So anybody supervising that situation. Then the guys going in themselves, in-depth knowledge, theoretical and practical, it tells us. And there's my practice through to competence bit. Didn't make that up, simply right-click, put it in the slide. It's that simple, yeah? That's exactly what it's talking about. So, self-rescue. Self-rescue bit is sometimes a mystery. I go to confined space jobs and look at them, and I see people running about in the confined space wearing a gas monitor, an atmosphere monitor, for a variety of gases, or all gases, or one gas, or maybe just oxygen. And the question you've got to ask is, if it goes off, what are you going to do? Because if you've gone to the far end of a complicated confined space and the gas monitor goes off, because there is a gas, all it's going to tell you is you're going to die. You may have well have died relaxed. Yeah? These two things, to me, the escape set and the gas monitor, are inextricably linked. If you need gas monitoring, you need a method of getting out, because if you specify gas monitoring, you're saying to people, I think there might be a problem. I haven't managed all those problems. So just as a little bit of backup, put a gas monitor on, mate, because I might not have cracked it. Yeah? Then not give anybody an escape set to get out. I just do not understand how that hangs together personally. I just cannot see it. And similarly, I found less people, because those cost more than gas monitors, but I've seen it the other way around. Wearing a gas monitor, an escape set and no gas monitor. Well, how the hell are you going to know when to use it? Yeah, it just does not hang together. And then there's the people for standby. They'll need some theoretical and practical knowledge. So there's the specific training for the person standing outside. All these different people I've looked at have all been taken now by people like City and Guilds and made into different courses. There's a management course and a standby person's course, and they're divided up into risk levels: low risk, medium risk and high risk. So the whole accreditation process has gone right across the board with all these. So it kind of squares off what I'm saying here, that I think these people need training, and City and Guilds certainly wouldn't be doing that if they didn't think there was a market for doing the training. So they've certainly put that forward, yeah. Then the people doing the rescue. It says in the confined spaces regulations, again, similar to the work at height regulations, don't rely on the emergency services. It says that in the regulation it says reliance on the emergency services will not be considered sufficient to comply with these regulations. It means get sorted to do something about it yourself. You may have the guy 3/4 of the way out of there before the emergency services arrive. Now there's the other photograph with the significant thing on. Anybody spot what it was, by the way? It's the airline breathing apparatus. You know when I showed you the guy climbing in with the cylinder on his back? That lasts 30 minutes, hypothetically. That's based on 40 litres a minute. If you're panicking in a confined space, you use way more than 40 litres a minute. The point is, for a complicated rescue and getting somebody on a stretcher, and I say I was down at Essex Fire and Rescue a couple of weekends ago. We had just a practice session with one of their rescue teams. It does not hang together. You cannot get somebody out on one cylinder. It just does not work. So you've either got an abundance of people and cylinders, or you may need airline breathing apparatus. What I can tell you, if you get involved in confined spaces and you ring 999, what you will not get, as far as I'm aware, is a fire and rescue service turning up with airline breathing apparatus, because they don't have any anymore. So it's, have we risk assessed and trained people to do the rescue on site? Yeah? And if you do, for goodness sake, I implore you, risk assess the kit you've got, because ringing up and getting a set of backpack self-contained breathing apparatus does not necessarily do the trick. If it takes longer than the 20 minutes of hard work to get a person on the stretcher, and I've done that, and certainly in these, in some of our confined space facilities, on the top level course, we will use a live IP. I put myself up as the IP. So I've been trained to be the bad, injured person. Yeah, I can really moan and whinge for England when I'm in there. You know what I mean? It's like, about everything. And what I can tell you in the back of which in the fixed unit or the trucks, it doesn't matter. What I can tell you is in the back of there that, as yet, nobody's got me on the stretcher and got me out in an hour, including the fire and rescue service. Because I act like the dummy bends and it doesn't fight back. I'm 15 stone and tall, and I don't go around corners. Yeah? And I whinge and complain. Yeah? And it is extremely difficult to rescue people from a confined space and get them on the stretcher. Extremely difficult, believe me. If you've had the cylinder, you've used 3. If you've got airline, great. Problem is with airline, in the excitement for people to get to the injured party, they take a different route. Very difficult when you both want to come back carrying the stretcher. You know, and stuff like that, it just needs thinking about. Yeah, there's just stuff to think about there. You've got to retain a bit of humour, haven't you? Because after all these years in confined spaces, you just, you know, it's got to be there, hasn't it? Yeah. Just thinking about the airline breathing, have we risk assessed the gear to get people out of confined spaces? So anybody else involved in confined space risk assessment, surely? How can you be doing confined space risk assessments if you've not been trained in confined spaces? How can you call? There's a call in the regulations for the responsible person. So that's the person who fills all this in then. Are you trained? Oh, actually, no, I never bothered. I sent the lads on it, but I never actually came myself. So I would guess that they weren't doing, yeah? One thing about the practical training is, for me, and to finish off, because I'm sure I've run my time out now, haven't I? I'm sure it's getting close. 5 minutes, I thought I was getting close. Is that the practical training has to be safe. For me, it's absolutely in there. I hear of people being injured going down makeshift tunnels, old underground shafts, brick culverts. If you have, one of the requirements we've got when we're training the operative that's going to go in, it says make sure that they're mentally and physically suitable. Mentally suitable means they're claustrophobic or afraid of the dark. I'm afraid it's that simple. And every so many weeks we get somebody who is. And so what would happen if you'd sent them down in a deep, dark, disused sewer or shaft under this building to find out then that they have a problem? Because right in the middle of your confined space training course, you have a confined space crisis now. Because you've got to go and do that rescue. You know, so there's issues there for me. So above all, it's got to be safe. To me, you've got to be able to flood the confined space with light instantaneously. You've got to be able to adjust light levels to acclimatise people to confined spaces. Like athletes acclimatise themselves to the atmosphere and the levels of oxygen, people have got to get themselves adjusted to working in the dark. And when you get novices, and we do regularly, I was doing a course middle of last year, and this guy, real big guy, you know, looked like the type that might be a forward at rugby, much bigger than me, said, "Can I have a word with you at break time, mate?" I said, "Yeah, no problem." I said, "What's the issue?" He goes, "Frightened of the dark." It's like, and you don't expect it. You stereotype this guy, this big, strong, he's not going to be frightened. He said, "I've got to get my 6-year-old. He said, if the power goes off at home, I've got to get my 6-year-old. He said, "We've got torches and night lights everywhere." He was never going to go in confined spaces, was he? You know, he's not going to be him to go in that confined space, into that darkness. And there's the claustrophobia bit. You know, if you put people in the confined space and increase the heat level, so I kind of have oil-fired central heating in these things, and I wind that up a little bit, and it gets a little bit like this, and I don't like it in here now. I'm just like, I want to get out, yeah? So you need some method of getting people out. Open some doors quickly. Bang, doors open, lights on, daylight, instantaneously. It's got to be safe for the novice as well as the experienced person, yeah? So it's all about making confined space training safe. If you look at the one on the bottom left with the cameras, yeah? Being able to see what people are doing, being able to hear what they're doing. If there's a problem, I want to know about it if I'm the trainer. Yeah? I want to know about it wherever I am. And it doesn't mean me stand up. I've rigged these things up. That's actually a Central London photograph, is that one there? I've rigged these things up with Wi-Fi, so wherever I walk about on site, if I'm stood next to the truck when I'm training and it's on my mobile or my iPad or whatever, I see what's going on. It wants to be safe. Confined space training has got to be safe, it's got to be interactive, and it's got to be realistic. The people who need it, we've looked at. I even like the people who just do the paperwork to have a little bit of a go with the practical as well. Let's feel what this really means if I'm going to send somebody in the confined space. The better run companies for confined spaces are those that would train everybody, yeah, actually across the board, even the management to some level before they go in. Nigel said 5 minutes. I've about used 4 of them. That brings me to the any questions bit. I would say Nigel just showed you that over there. That's not a selling brochure, by the way. It's somebody said, "Can you write a bit of a thing about confined spaces?" So I did, and it's not right-clicked off Google. It's the thoughts of a very old confined space controller, basically. So it's kind of advice as much as anything on confined spaces. Very welcome to take one if you wish. If there are not enough, if you get in touch with Nigel, to get in touch with me, I'll post some more down if anybody else wants them. At that stage, I would like to say thank you and ask if there are any questions.
I've got a question. It's sort of got two parts, but they both relate to contractors. You mentioned the necessity to avoid work, confined space work.
Yes.
I certainly have one client whose approach to avoiding confined space work is to contract it out.
Yeah. We'll call that risk transfer, you mean?
Yeah,
then? Yeah.
But I mean, my concern is obviously the contractors coming in
Yeah.
aren't going to start saying, oh no, we don't think anyone should go down there, because that's their business.
Yeah.
So the sort of question would be really what position we would be in, having made a decision just to get contractors in and having missed that step of how can we avoid it. The second part of it is relating to permits,
Yeah.
which is that client has an approach of if it's a contractor, they have to work under their own permit system, not under our permit system. So we won't give them a permit to go and work in our confined space. They have to have their own permit system, so
Right.
they check it's safe. So how do you feel about both those parts of?
Well, the first part of the question referenced contractors. I would see that you had a responsibility to make sure that the contractor is suitably trained before they go in the confined space. Indeed, it says you have. It says if you read closely in the ACOP, it will say that you've got to make sure that people you allow into the confined space are trained. So that's your section 2, section 3 bit. You know, section 2 for them, section 3. So one of the ones I did for the HSE was exactly that. It was a mechanical operations contractor, a mechie contractor, who were going to change some spigots on a tank to find that the tank needed cleaning because it had a nasty product in. And the contractors, so the client said, "Can you do that?" And the guy went, "Yes." To send somebody in the guy where the guy died in the tank, a youngster died in the tank who was 20, was burnt to death, with the resulting jail sentence. But that was a classic. And what happened there is the contractor was prosecuted, so was the client for letting them do it. Yeah, so that's the answer to that question. Yeah, I hope.
The first bit though was about avoiding it in the first place. What I'm saying is even if we check that the contractor is competent,
Yeah.
we're asking them to go into a confined space
Yeah.
without having gone through the.
You still need to go through. For me, you still need to go through the exercise of avoiding it. Don't forget the avoidance level. If it is like the work at height, it's the so far as reasonably practicable. So it's risk versus how much it's going to cost. You know, does my piece of cleaning kit do it? Does an endoscope do the inspection? It's that kind of thing. One of you would have wanted to go through that exercise of thinking, have we done the right thing to avoid it? Because certainly if you are the contractor, and that's what I've always been, you know, this safety bit is in latter years, I've always done the contracting bit. Clients will say, can you just go and clean that out? They want it clean, pristine, but, and it's not me being negative, but you've not always felt loved and looked after, should I say. Yeah, that nobody had thought about. And I've said, well, look, I've got this piece of kit, and it would be typically one of those pieces of kit on there. This will keep us out of the confined space for 99% of the time in there. You might have to go and clean a few corners out afterwards. But it costs more because I've had to buy the piece of kit. Those little bits that big are 25 grand a piece, and it's a load of kit to run it. So it costs more, but then it's get there. So there you've got this. You're right properly into your reasonably practicable thing. Risk versus, versus your time. What's in the tank? The nastier the stuff that's in there, the more you want to be trying to keep out. You know, if it's the stainless steel tank in a food factory where it's pristine clean and it's steamed out and everything, well, you might want to go in there and clean it. But if it's something that's got some, where they've been taking waste ends from. Hydrocarbon process. No, you don't want to be going in there. So you've still got. I would still want to see it thought out. Is the answer to that? Yeah. Both of you. Yeah. I would want you. I'd want to see you challenge the contractor. The other thing when you're thinking about contractors, you may get the competent contractor. And in my particular case, you may get the competent contractor that's going to do the job. But then what about when the scaffolding goes in? Are the scaffolders trained to go in confined spaces? Remember what I said earlier, it doesn't say except the scaffolders or anybody else for that matter, saying it's our scaffolders training people like that. But the answer to your second one, an issue in permits to work, the issue of a permit for work for confined spaces is such that what you're saying when you issue the permit for work for a confined space, that you're making it safe, as we can at this stage, to enter. So that's full isolation of anything electrical, mechanical, hazardous substances, so we can't get the free-flowing solids, the ingress of gases, liquids, the whole bit. So with this permit is saying we have isolated it, made it safe, we've ventilated it and made it safe up to a point, yeah, and issue the permit on that basis. As the contractor, when you've issued me with that permit, yeah, then we risk assess together and make that decision. Well, do I need to wear breathing apparatus and chemical suits still, and so on and so forth? A permit says I have done this to make this safe. So I would again not necessarily want to see a permit to work issued by the contractor unless the contractor was a specialist, would be my advice. Okay?
You mentioned using the self-contained breathing apparatus and the airlines.
Yes.
But you didn't make any mention of forced ventilation and using sort of some system of ventilation which you can install temporarily to make that confined space safe. I was just wondering, is that something you ever come across in your...
Yes, using forced ventilation is something that you would do by default in a confined space. And in 45 minutes, it's how much can we get in 45 minutes? You would always use forced ventilation. The problem with using forced ventilation is that there's a school of thought out there that if you use forced ventilation, you've changed a confined space, and you've just used the word safe, you've changed a confined space to not being a confined space. Now, I don't see it like that. If that ventilation fails, it goes back to being what it was. So you still need the self-rescue breathing apparatus, even if you've got forced ventilation. Because you could say, well, if that ventilation system fails, we'll have two ventilation systems, and if we have one, well, and it becomes a chain now. So it's, I don't subscribe to the idea that you can make it safe. Absolutely, I would always ventilate and force ventilate a confined space. But what if that goes wrong? It reverts back to what it was. If you've got some deposits on the bottom of the confined space, which is usually where they are, not always, but usually, the air's going to go over them and they're going to be carried away, yeah? Fine, but if that system fails, they're there again instantaneously, so I would still have the gas monitor and that to tell people about that, yeah? And if you are using forced ventilation, it's kind of like what goes up must come down. It's what goes in must come out. And it's where those volatile and toxic gases are going when they come out. Now are you making a short circuit back to the thing and back in again, which if the wind changes, you can. So it would be belt and braces for me on that one, I'm afraid. All right. If that's it, guys, thank you very, very much for your attention. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, just finally, thank you very much to Ken. I've made quite a few notes myself, actually, and I'd like to think it was a topic I knew something about, but I think it's the old adage that we're never too old to learn, so that's excellent. I will just remind just a couple of things, really, as we go. Those who are interested in speaking to Philip about CDM, he'll be staying around to talk about that. Anybody that can help with work